Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the last section, kind of creating images in Photoshop, kind of from nothing, from scratch. Well, in this section, we're dedicating it entirely to actions. It's another way that we can create images, but we haven't actually talked about it or even looked at the actions at all in this VTM. So we're going to kind of dedicate an entire section simply to actions. The actions has a palette all of its own over here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this palette out just to kind of show you what we have. I'm going to collapse this for just a second here. Actions is kind of like a script inside of Photoshop, a script that completes performs a function line by line from the top to the bottom until it gets through. What would be a better description of what a script would be, just for?
Well, I'm thinking probably just an easy way of doing an action or explaining an action would be, when you go in and you're going to, like when you created the lightning, you went through a series of steps to get that final, lightning look. And each step that you went through is like an action. Okay?
Right.
So actions are nothing but a group of these steps that help speed up the process of creating some sort of image or effect, etc.
Okay.
So instead of having to remember to go through 10 or 15 different steps, you just can run an action and it'll do the 10 or 15 steps for you in just a matter of, 1 second, 2 seconds, and you're done.
Let's take a look at some of those actions right now. In my Actions palette, I have a little folder here called Default Actions. These are given to us and installed with Photoshop by the guys at Adobe. Did a nice job on this. Inside my Default Actions, I have a number of different standalone actions. I'm going to go ahead and collapse this again so we can take a look at it. Each one of these is an entire, like a script in itself, that will allow us to perform a function like create a vignette around a selection area, or create a wood frame, or cast shadows on a type layer. You can see that some of these have parentheses and inside says selection or type. These are best performed on a selection area, a layer, or type. Let me show you kind of an example of what we're talking about here. I'm going to open up an image, maybe this palm tree here, and this first one called Vignette has that parentheses selection, which kind of lets me know I really need to perform this while I have a selection going. So I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool and throw a selection area around this tree. To run an action, it's as simple as highlighting the word, the action name, and then coming down to the bottom palette here. If you hover your mouse over this little triangle, it says play the selection. It's kind of like your control on a VCR. Just hitting the play actually runs through the selection line by line. I'm going to open up Vignette just so that we can watch as it runs through. Notice as soon as I hit the play, it's going to start walking through these little layers here, line by line. I'm going to hit play, and it's running through the first make snapshot, and it hits feather here, and it pops up my feather selection dialog box to ask me, well, yeah, I know I have to feather, but it stops for a second to ask me how much feathering do I want to add. I'm going to go ahead and change this from 5 to maybe 15 to make it more pronounced and hit OK. Watch what happens as it continues. It runs through the rest of these layers, and my final result, when it gets done creating that, walking through all those layers, it returns to the top and says, okay, I'm done, I'm stopped now. And instead of me manually creating this vignette, which we've actually showed earlier in this VTM how to create something like this, it does it for me. Saved me a lot of time, a lot of stress. I didn't have to hassle with it at all, and I did it in less than about 5 seconds.
So could some of these preset actions be really good for somebody new to Photoshop who wants to learn how some of these effects are created?
Actually, yeah. As a matter of fact, if you want to know how this vignette was created, we're already taking a look at it right here. Just by clicking on this vignette, we can see the first thing we need to do is make a snapshot. The second thing we need to do is feather. But even those, making a snapshot, can be broken down into separate components. Now, this might be a little bit cryptic for you at first, but as you kind of get used to how actions are performed, how actions are created, these are going to make a little bit more sense. If I open up the feathers, you can see that the dialog box gives me a default of 5 pixels. So my order of operations for creating a vignette is to start with a blank image, create a feather area, continue on down, make a new layer, fill it with white using a 100% opacity set to mode normal, and these are just the steps involved in doing this.
Wow, very cool.
Okay?
Can you use one after the other, like maybe colorize one or choose that vignette and then choose another one? Or
maybe like that sepia tone, you said color, and it was kind of what I was thinking about when you said...
Yeah. I just want to know if you can use them one after the other,
You know, Gump, you can use them kind of one on top. Like now I've created a vignette, and now I want to maybe make it a sepia tone image. You do have to be careful with these. They can kind of jump up and bite you. You might want to look over at my layers here. When I created that vignette, it did create more layers. A healthy understanding of how layers work will really help you in using your actions, because if I was to perform some of these while selected on the wrong layer, we're going to get undesirable results. Let me try running the sepia tone, which has in the parentheses layer, so it really wants to run it on its own layer. I'm going to select the layer 1, where we actually have our pixels of the picture now. So I have layer 1 selected. To run this script, I simply click on the name and hit play. Let's just see what happens. Good. In this case, we got a desirable effect. We've created a sepia tone vignette, so we can use them simultaneously like that.
Looks pretty good.
But once again, I do have to stress, if you're on the wrong layer in some of these, or if you do them out of order, you can get undesirable results. Instead, let me show you kind of something that I would do. It's called flattening the layers. I have an image here that's a multi-layered document. I've got all sorts of different things that were performed on this. I've got some layers that have just pixels of trees, and then the one above that that has the same pixels of the trees, except this time sepia tone. I've even got some adjustment layers. Before I run anything else, I'm going to go ahead and come over to the options here and choose Flatten Image. What this does is it collapses all of my layers into one final layer, and it says Discard Hidden Layers. You can see that my background down here has turned the visibility off. I'm going to just say OK to that so that I can keep this exact look. So now I have one layer, and I don't have to worry so much about running actions against one layer, because it should perform just the way I want it to be. Like, for example, let me go ahead and throw a wood frame on here so you can kind of see a final product. I'm going to throw a wood frame onto my background and just hit play and wait for a second. Some of these will take a little while. Some of them take longer than others. And don't be afraid if you see from time to time little message box come up. This says image size must be minimum of 100 pixels wide and tall. Yeah, so what? I'm going to continue. See what happens. It's going to run through creating more layers and performing these actions step by step. I really should have opened this up just to show you how many actions are involved in creating a wood frame. When it finally gets done, this is what my final output is. I have a sepia tone vignette with a wood frame around it. Kind of cool. And I spent, all of 2 minutes doing that? But you know that I spent 2 minutes doing that, but the next time somebody looks over your shoulder and says, oh my goodness, that's so cool, how long did you spend doing that? You can say hours and hours, stayed up days and nights working on that. It just lie your teeth off. That's what I do.
So when you merge these layers, though, you give up just a little control working on the layers.
Yeah, you do give up a little bit of control. And you're going to understand how that control will work for you as soon as I show you how to create layers and what some of these other icons mean here. I'm going to kind of skip giving you an example of, or telling you or describing to you what these icons are until I show you how to create your own. Okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. Let me go ahead and start with a blank image here. I'm going to close this down and not save. I'm going to open up a new file. And in this case, I'm going to need a 8 by 10 at 72 dpi image here. New blank image. I want to create my own action and use something that I've already shown in this VTM, kind of like that lightning strike that Buzz was talking about. I want to go ahead and show you how to create an action using that, because there are so many different levels of or different steps in performing that action or creating that lightning that it makes for a really good action. First thing I want to do is come down to the bottom of my palette and create a new set, this little folder icon. When I click on that, I'm going to get presented with the new set dialog box where I can name it. I'm going to name this Rookie Set, because that's me, and say OK. Instead of this default action here, now I have default and rookies. As I open and collapse this, you can see there's nothing in it yet. It's just a blank folder, or kind of a directory that I can throw all of my actions in. Okay? Next thing I want to do is actually start a new action. I want to create this thing by clicking on the little dog-eared piece of paper, just like we would create a new layer. Well, I'm going to create a new action, so I'm going to click on the dog-eared layer, or dog-eared piece of paper there, and I'm going to call this Lightning. And I want to put this inside Rookie Set. I could choose default actions. It would place that inside the default, but I'm going to put this in Rookie Set. Also, you can see that we have function keys. In case I wanted to assign this to a function key so that any time I ever pressed F2, it would go ahead and run my Lightning script, or choose some of these. You can also choose Shift and Control, so you can set a lot of these up yourself. I'm not going to choose anything right now, so keep that on none. But I also have the option of colorizing these things just for my own visual aid. I like red, so I'm going to say red and record. Now I've got Rookie Set. Inside Rookie Set, I have Lightning. Now, as I toggle Lightning, the no actions have been recorded yet. Nothing's actually in there, but we have the name of the action. Down next to the play button, we have this little red button. This means that the action it's already recording. Anything I do now in Photoshop is going to be recorded and stuck into memory and listed underneath my action called Lightning. So, first thing I want to do, since I've got it recording, move this over a little bit. First thing I want to do is create a new layer. Okay? So I have a new layer above the background. And as you can see, it recorded that, make layer. We can open that up, and it says without below, obviously above whatever is previously selected. So I've made a new layer. I'm going to just follow through the actions that I performed earlier, like making sure that I have a foreground to background gradient. I'm going to make sure that I default my foreground and background colors, and I'm going to apply a gradient right in the middle of my layer. Doing that has created a new layer called Gradient with all of this information. Everything that I've done has been recorded in there, so I can go back and look at that later on to find out how I did that.
So it doesn't actually create a new layer when you do that; it just creates a new layer in the action.
Correct.
I got you.
Correct. And when I play this, it's going to step through each of these from top to bottom, and it's going to create a layer before creating a gradient.
So more or less commands. Those are commands for Photoshop to do.
That was actually the word that I was looking for. These are different commands. Yes. So the next command that I want to perform is the reverse cloud. So I'm going to go to Filter, choose Render, Difference Clouds, and I can see my lightning strike start to take shape. You can see that that's been recorded. I'm going to do Control-I for inverse, and that's been recorded. Next thing that I do is my adjustments, choose levels, and slide these levels over toward the right so that I can create my lightning strike. Say OK to that. Next, I want to add some color by going to Image, Adjust, Hue, Saturation, and clicking on the Colorize button. I'm going to bump up the saturation, and I'm going to change the hue over to some blue, almost real dark blue. I like that right there, and I'm going to say OK. The last thing I'm going to do is change the blending mode to screen. Now, this is going to just wipe out my image, but I'm going to change this to screen. And as you can see, my image has gone to white. That's not exactly what I wanted it to do, but my action will record that very last thing that I did, changing it to screen. Once I'm done recording those actions, I hit, or those commands, I'm going to hit the stop button. I want to stop recording now. So that you can see that my lightning is actually there, I'm going to select on the background and just go ahead and throw a preset gradient, like maybe this copper gradient, onto the screen so that we can see I really do have a lightning strike there, and it was set to screen, but because it was white, you just kind of obliterated everything. But you can see that I have a lightning strike there. Okay, we have an action. It's been recorded. We started and stopped it, so there's all the commands that make up that action. I'm going to collapse that down again, and if I want to run that action, each time all I have to do is highlight it. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm on the layer 1 because my first command is to make a new layer, so it's always going to make it above the one that's previously selected. So I'm going to make sure that I'm on the right layer, highlight the lightning, and hit play. Let it walk through, creating all of my commands, and each time I do that, I get yet another lightning strike. So I can do that over and over and over again, put that into an action, and then the next time somebody asks me, ooh, you know what would be neat if I had a lightning right here? Pfft, no problem. I got it saved. Boom, it's done. But what if I wanted to get a little bit more control over this script? Right now, if I hit it, it just runs.
Well, I'm just wondering. I see that it's made 2 lightning strikes of the same color. Let's say I wanted to change the color of one lightning strike to another, for example.
Bingo. We want a little bit more control over this. We want to be able to change maybe the color for one, and maybe even set the levels to a different type so that we get some that are a little bit wider and some that are a little bit thinner. Let's go ahead and choose that. Thanks, Gump. That's actually good for this illustration. Let's go ahead and make sure that I can control my colors. Well, if I walk down through here and read these, make layers, that's good. Making gradients, that's good. But we want to change the hue and saturation. I'm going to put a little blocker in this little box here. This is actually going to stop my action as it walks through and says, uh-oh, the user now wants to control something here. So let me go ahead and stop and ask him what it is that he wants. Now it's going to try to open up a dialog box here for me. Hopefully it'll be this hue and saturation dialog box that I'll be able to adjust the sliders, but that's what I want, so I'm going to put my little blocker right there. Now, next time I run through this action by hitting play, it goes through the first few by itself because it has not been asked to stop until it hits that little dialog or that little icon there and says, okay, I'm going to pop open the hue and saturation dialog box and let him tell me what it is that he wants to perform. So if I wanted this next one to be red, I can change that around, change the saturation a little bit, and when I hit OK, it just continues down. So that time I got a little bit more control. Well, let's say we need to do some control on the amount of levels. I can put a block on levels and a block on the hue saturation. Now it'll stop on each one of those points. Because we're getting a little carried away here, I'm going to delete some of these layers and, starting with my background, go ahead and play that again till it hits levels, stop, and it brings up my layers, my levels. And I can go back from where I originally started and change maybe this one to be a real fat type of lightning strike, and this might get kind of ugly. But I'll say OK, jumps over to the hue saturation, and there I've got a little bit more control over how my actions get run. Cool? Now, sometimes, I wouldn't suggest this in this particular case, but if I want to skip a line, I can easily do that by turning off this check mark. These check marks mean that each command is going to be run and says, yep, run this one, then run that one, and then so on and so forth. If I wanted to turn off invert, I just turn that off by taking out that check mark. And then when I run it again, let's see what happens. It skips over the invert. Well, obviously this will ruin my effect, and I don't think I'm even going to get anything. Yeah, I didn't. I got a blank layer. So obviously this isn't what I would want to do in this particular action, but it is there as an option if you want to skip over a line.
So you can use these actions over and over again.
Over and
right?
over and over
So
again.
you would have to save this action somehow so that Photoshop knows that you have it in like some little crazy folder somewhere, so every time you open Photoshop, this action's there.
Correct. It's there now. It's inside my rookie set. It's been recorded. It's there.
So now anytime you open Photoshop, it'll be there. You don't have to do anything extra to save that particular set.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Correct. And you know what? Because you'd mentioned that, I wanted to also look at some of the other ones. We have the default, but there are some other ones that are loaded up into or installed with your version of Photoshop, but you might not have access to it right now. Clicking in the little menu here, we can see we have some frames, some image effects, some productions, some more text effects, and textures. I'm going to go ahead and load up the textures real quick. Whoops, and that gives them all to me, broken out. I'm going to collapse that down so you can see we have default, rookie set, and textures. Inside textures, we have a number of different actions to create all of these different types of look, like split wood, asphalt, bricks, just obsidian. The list goes on and on and on. They're a lot of fun to just get in here and play with. So let me go ahead, close that out. Don't save it. I don't need to save it. I've got the action. Can rerun it anytime I want now. Create a new image. And let's see what wood pine looks like. We've tried creating our own version of brushed metal and then turned it into wood. So let's see what theirs look like. I select the name, hit play, wait for a couple seconds, let it walk through its steps. Steps, by the way, look like that. And there we get wood pine. And I spent hours doing this, by the way.
Ours
right?
is
Looks
so
like
much
it.
better.
Yeah. Ours, what did you say?
Ours is so much better.
Ours looks so much better. But this is wood pine, and you can see that it does create the layers. Do be careful with that. But you might get yourself into trouble, so I'm going to go back to an original white background before I try something else. What do you want to see? Maybe like green slime. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to run green slime.
Nickelodeon, right?
The Nickelodeon look right here, folks. And boom, we
That's
get green
cool.
slime. Okay, so this could be really handy for those of you that are looking for a texture, something to create for maybe a background. Come in here, take a look at your actions, and see what's available for you. And if you need to record your own actions, play around with that. If also, kind of throw this in, there's a number of different tutorials out there online on how to create textures, these images inside of Photoshop, and a fantastic place that you can go look for these and hunt them out is on the 3D Buzz website. Some sections for searching for tutorials. Do a search for Photoshop tutorials, and then try practicing creating actions out of some of those tutorials that you find there. It's a great way to learn Photoshop and create these things, and you can easily recall them at a moment's notice.
Sounds good.
Cool?
All right.
Looks fun.
Think
All
we
right.
learned anything on that?
I got it.
You got it. Okay.
All right. Thanks.